Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best. Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. In our next conversation with Dr. Taylor Petrey, we'll talk about Elder Dallin Oak's major role in helping to design LGBT policy for the LDS hierarchy. We'll talk about in ways Oakes has accommodated gay rights as well as his opposition to gay marriage. So it's going to be a fun conversation. You won't want to miss it. We'll also talk about that internet rumor that says the church issued the Family Proclamation as a result of a Hawaii lawsuit in the 1990s to oppose gay marriage. Check out our conversation. Hey, I also want to remind you that if you'd like a copy of Taylor's book, Tabernacles of Clay, I'm giving away a free copy in our next episode. So if you haven't signed up, sign up today. Go to gospeltangents.com/Petrey, P-E-T-R-E-Y, and you can win a copy of Taylor's book, Tabernacles of Clay. Sign up today. Now back to our conversation.
Well, and it's interesting. I think you've really laid the foundation well with talking about interracial marriage and then talking about feminism. So that leads to gay rights and that sort of a thing. And this is one thing, I don't think this was in your book, but it's a question that I've had come up a lot, and I really want to talk about it. Because we talked a little bit about it with Greg Prince as well, but there's an internet rumor basically that says that the proclamation on the family was a response to what was going on with gay marriage in Hawaii in about 1995, I believe it was. As we talk about kind of the history of gay rights and that sort of a thing, can you address that issue? Is that I've even heard the rumor that the Proclamation on the Family was not written by the apostles. It was written by the Curtin and McConkie law firm. Mm-hmm. Can you enlighten us on that? Is that a true story?
Yeah, it may be, right? But the documents don't fully support at least one iteration of that internet rumor. So let me sort of lay out the timeline a little bit, because I do think it's important, and I absolutely do think that the Proclamation on the Family is connected to what's going on in Hawaii and is connected to a broader set of conversations. So I do mention some of this in the book, but let me get into a little bit of the detail here.
You don't get into the conspiracy though, right?
I don't explicitly address it, because the documents, I say what I think the documents will support, right? Mm-hmm. So one iteration of the rumor is that it was needed in order for the church to win a certain set of legal battles that they were engaged in the courts there. And I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that that's an accurate understanding of what was happening. But it's in 1993 that Hawaii's Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. But they put a stay on the decision, meaning that they say it's not going to go into effect. We're going to hear another round of arguments, and this other round of arguments will try to establish whether or not there really are compelling reasons why the state needs to discriminate on the basis of sex when it comes to marriage. And so same-sex marriage is technically legal, but not able to be put into practice yet, because they're waiting for the sort of other sets of arguments. And so what happens is that Hawaii's conservative sort of church leaders and so on, and of course the LDS church is getting involved in this, start to kind of make a campaign against same-sex marriage in Hawaii. They're appointed to a commission. First, there's Catholics and LDS people are appointed to a commission that's going to study the issue, and the commission is then going to that report is then going to go to the courts, for the courts to evaluate it. But the commission itself is disbanded as unconstitutional because it's mixing church and state. It has all of these. They're appointed specifically as LDS and Catholic representatives on this for their religious affiliations to write these opinions. And the Supreme Court says, no. You don't get to have a state-appointed theological commission here, So they disband the commission, and then that really freaks out the LDS church, right? And this happens, I think, in 1994, maybe 1995. Or early 1995. And so the church is really feeling like they're going to lose this battle. The Supreme Court there is not open to their arguments. They're getting shut out, at every step along the way. And so two things happen. The church passes, in Utah, the church really seems to be behind the scenes in passing a Defense of Marriage Act, which says that if same-sex marriage is legalized in Hawaii, we're not going to recognize it here in Utah. And that then becomes the basis for everybody else right after Utah adopts also a Defense of Marriage Act that says the same thing. Wherever same-sex marriage is legal, if it happens to become legal in one state, it's not going to be legal here. And then the Clinton administration signs a federal Defense of Marriage Act as well, which says the same thing. The federal government will not recognize same-sex marriages that happen in any particular state. And this is because they think that same-sex marriage is going to happen in Hawaii. They're pretty sure at this point,
And the reason why is because if you don't have a law, and I'm not a constitutional scholar, but isn't there some sort of a constitutional argument that if something's recognized in one state, it has to be recognized in all states, unless that state has a law? And so that's why these laws all of a sudden go crazy.
Yes, and the constitutionality of those laws was precisely always in question, and they eventually lose. When this issue goes before the Supreme Court in 2015, the federal government at the time refuses to defend these Defense of Marriage Act laws because they say they're not constitutional. We agree with the opposition; these are not constitutional. You can't say and this, the same thing had happened with interracial marriage too. It's like, okay, well, in Virginia, interracial marriage is illegal, even though they were married in another state, right? And so this was the Loving versus Virginia decision in 1967. So the same constitutional issues were just replaying themselves here, that we're not going to recognize some marriages that are performed legally and lawfully in another state. So the church comes out with a proclamation. And it's an affirmation of a kind of theological vision, right? That marriage is between a man and a woman. And then it's an explicitly political document. At the end, the last paragraph says, we appeal to citizens and judges, and we appeal to legislatures and leaders all throughout the world, that this is the thing that you need to make sure that same-sex marriage doesn't happen. Same-sex marriage and homosexuality aren't mentioned in the document, but it's absolutely the implicit thing because the church is deeply embedded in what's going on in Hawaii. Did they need to do that for some sort of legal tricky reasons? I don't think so, right? But it becomes a kind of clarion call, a kind of thing that unites the church membership and says, this is our political stance. And again, we have to read it as a political document. The other part of the context that I think needs to be understood is that there are a number of political documents that are coming out during this exact same time period, both before and after the LDS version of the proclamation, that are making the exact same kinds of arguments. So Phyllis Schlafly ran something called the Eagle Forum. And she was still alive at the time in the 1990s. She'd passed away, I think, maybe five or so years ago. But she was running the Eagle Forum, and then there were other sort of conservative groups, and they all got together and they wrote a document in 1993, I want to say, called, maybe it was 1989. Again, my memory is fuzzy a little bit here, called The Family, a Manifesto. And The Family, a Manifesto looks exactly like what the Proclamation on the Family does, except it's longer, right? I think it's 5 pages or so. And it says, what are the obligations of husbands and wives to each other? What are the obligations of husbands and wives to their children? What are the sort of basic scriptural values that inform these positions? It took a little bit more aggressive stances on issues like spousal hierarchy than the LDS version does, but it does affirm their equal dignity. Husband and wife have equal dignity before God, it says, So we still have some of that egalitarian and patriarchal tension even in a document like that. And then after that, there are other documents that look very similar to the LDS version of the proclamation. So I also want to put the proclamation in the context of all of these other political documents that the religious right is producing, that is sort of laying out an anti-feminist and anti-homosexuality agenda as a political thing. And again, to understand the proclamation as a political document and to see it in conversation with all of those. Did Curtin and McConkie write it? I've heard that rumor too. I don't know. Probably they were consulted on it in some way. As many public documents are consulted with the legal teams. Of course, every institution does that, right? And they may even have had researchers that were looking at some of these other the similarities between the proclamation and some of these other conservative documents are so striking to me, at least. That it would be surprising to me if they didn't know them, if they didn't have them in front of them, because the order, the organization, the topics that are addressed, and even in some cases the wording is so similar. They seem to really be relying on they're a part of a genre, at least. The LDS Proclamation is part of a genre of these other documents coming out of the religious right during the 90s.
So this I'm going to get these mixed up. So the LDS Family Proclamation, was that before the Family Manifesto of the Evangelical? No, it was the other way around. Okay, so the proclamation copies the Family Manifesto. Okay.
Again, copies is a strong word. It seems to be influenced by, or at least draws on similar, right? I don't know if I would be surprised if they didn't have it in front of them myself, because of those strong similarities. But I can't say for certain that it was consulted. There's no footnotes, right? And I haven't been able to talk to anybody who was in the room in the drafting of it, who may have known what sources were used as they looked into this. But there are a lot of one can read the Family Manifesto, this evangelical iteration, Catholic evangelical iteration, and very quickly see resonances in the LDS version.
Oh, that's very interesting. So the other thing that I found really super interesting about that chapter was that Elder Dallin Oaks seems to be the point man for gay issues specifically, and it seemed like you really I want to ask this question. Do you think that's why he was called to be an apostle, was because of his legal background, and they were worried that as ERA was passed that it would lead to gay marriage and that sort of a thing?
Possibly. They had already won the ERA battle by the time that Oaks comes on in leadership. Though Oaks had been president of BYU before that, and there is also often a pipeline that we see. Holland, Eyring, and others, people who have been presidents of one of the church's schools are often, then taken into this more senior leadership. So there are a variety of qualifications that I'm sure that he has, but his legal expertise and his reputation outside of the church, he was a University of Chicago law professor. He had argued in front of the Supreme Court on a number of occasions. He had been on the Utah Supreme Court. His resume is unparalleled, honestly, and so he has lots of qualifications. But one of the first things that he does, at least as we can tell, just based on the timeline of things, is issue this what's called a white paper to his a memorandum to his colleagues that has since leaked out. And I'm not the first one to talk about it. Lots of people have talked about it, so I feel comfortable the fact that it's a public document now, even though it was not intended originally for private use, of needing to talk about it as a historian. But it lays out a strategy of how the church is going to be dealing with gay rights going forward. And he sort of sees on the horizon that this is going to be the big issue. Feminism, they won, right? We won that. We beat ERA. How are we going to then be really smart and strategic in opposing gay rights? And, Oaks had replaced Marky Peterson. And Marky Peterson was really quite conservative on gay rights issues. He was a big opponent of legalizing sodomy. So there were a bunch of anti-sodomy laws that were being repealed in the 1970s, and Marky Peterson was out there, saying no, we need to keep these, and this is disgusting, and blah, this is, again, our civilization is going to crumble if we legalize sodomy, right? And so, but Elder Oaks comes on and takes a totally different tack. He says, listen, sodomy, we're not going to get involved in this anymore. It's going to be legal. These are consenting adults. Basically, he's like, that's not the issue. And he says, even employment discrimination, with certain exceptions, we're not going to get involved in that. We're not going to say that gay people can't work anymore, right? He carves out some exceptions and says, maybe not in schools, right? We're not going to allow them to work in schools, but we're not going to get involved in this. Where we need to save our energy is for the coming battle on same-sex marriage. And he writes this in 1984, 9 years before the Hawaii Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage. But he anticipates that this is going to be the thing. And the reason why is because same-sex marriage had been on the agenda in the 70s and 80s among gay rights activists as well. So again, it wasn't invented in the 1990s. It wasn't invented in the 2000s. People were talking about this back in the 60s and 70s and definitely in the 80s. And Oakes sort of sees, like, if we're going to get involved in opposing gay rights, we need to maintain some credibility on this issue and save it for gay marriage. That's the one thing that we really need to care about, because if gay marriage is legalized, then it becomes socially normal to such an extent that we won't be able to teach against it anymore. And so he really sort of anticipates exactly where we are today, that
is he prophetic?
Probably, he would see so, I'm sure. That and he has all of the same arguments that he doesn't seem to hold today anymore, but sort of he warns about homosexual recruitment in it, in this document. And I think his views have changed over time. I don't want to say that what he said in 1984 is probably exactly what he thinks today, but he definitely seems to have thought a lot about this issue in anticipation of what is going to come, and seems to be one of the most important figures in the church's positions on homosexuality and same-sex marriage. Certainly since he became an apostle, and continues to this day to be one of the leading speakers on this topic.
Would you say that Oakes, Hinckley, and Monson were probably the three ringleaders, for lack of a better word, as far as opposition to both feminism and gay marriage?
I think Maxwell is probably in the mix a little bit, and I wish that there are some people who know all the dirt and the secrets and the rumors and stuff like that, and I'm not one of those people. I had to rely on the public documents, to tell this story. But I think Maxwell is in the mix, and obviously Packer also. Packer is a big player in this. He's one of the major vocal opponents to the Equal Rights Amendment. Some of the worst things that were said about the Equal Rights Amendment by church leaders were said by Packer. He was then strongly in the patriarchal camp of things, right? And of course, he's also one of the most outspoken teachers up until his death on opposing homosexuality. And again, some of the quote unquote worst things that were ever said by church leaders in the modern era were said by Elder Packer. So I think we have to put him in that category as one of the main kind of drivers in the Quorum of the 12, at least on these issues.
Cool.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Dr. Taylor Petrey. In our next and final conversation, we're going to talk about whether homosexuality is contagious.
Look, homosexual sex must be so good that it's going to be like so attractive to people that everyone's going to want to do it, right? If we don't have some sort of negative stigmas against it, then everyone would be gay. And that leads to this idea then that they don't believe that people are naturally heterosexual, right? They don't believe there's some sort of hard wiring. They think that the only way that you become heterosexual is through this sort of molding and shaping of the human being into the properly formed masculine or properly formed feminine person.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please subscribe to patreon.com/gospeltangents. And for just $5 a month, you can hear the entire interview without any interruption. If you'd like a paperback version of our transcripts, go to Amazon.com and do a search for Gospel Tangents interview. Also, if you'd like to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website, and I'll be able to send you a transcript as soon as they are completed, and click the subscribe button. You can also find our latest information on Facebook.com/Gospel Tangents, as well as we're on Twitter @Gospel Tangents. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. The link is at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents, and you can subscribe there. Also, please give us a 5-star review. If you want to support all of the podcasts as part of the Dialogue Podcast Network, go to lyceum.fm, that's lyceum.fm, and do a search for Dialogue Podcast Network or Gospel Tangents, because, that's a pretty cool one too. Thanks again for listening. Click here to subscribe, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some of our great videos. Thanks again.